Good morning to everyone with us here today. My name is Krista Jack, and I'm the president of the Lakeville Area Chamber of Commerce. And this webinar is part of a series of real-time solutions that is brought to you by the Apple Valley, Burnsville, Hastings, Lakeville, and River Heights Chambers of Commerce. And the goal of these webinars is to address business concerns and questions as we continue to navigate through the pandemic. Before we get started, I want to give a special thank you to our series sponsor. It's the law firm of Doherty, Melinda, Solfast, Hills, and Bauer. They are a full-service law firm, and their attorneys work collaboratively to help clients achieve their goals. Their approach, to client service is personalized and responsive, and their experienced lawyers will work with you personally to help you explore your legal options and to take a course of action that is right for you. And just some quick housekeeping items this morning. Just a reminder that all participants are muted. We gathered lots of questions ahead of time for Representative Craig. We're excited to talk to her. And this webinar is being recorded so that it can be viewed on our partner websites. And so again, good morning to Representative Craig. Representative Angie Craig represents Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District, and she has been appointed to the House Committees on Agriculture, Transportation, Infrastructure, and Small Business. That sounds like you're very busy. She and her wife, Cheryl, have 4 sons, 3 in college or technical school and 1 in high school, so she is very busy. They live in Eagan. She is also a small business investor herself, the former head of global HR for a major Minnesota manufacturer, and a former newspaper reporter. That has got to be some good stories. So Representative Craig, we're so excited to have you this morning. Thank you so much. And like I said, if we can just have you maybe give us a little update of what's going on with you and in Congress, and especially as it relates to our business community, and then we'll get going with some questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Krista, for having me here this morning. And I just want to say thank you to the Chambers. The Spirit of Enterprise Award that the U.S. Chamber honored me with recently. I'm just so grateful for that award and to be able to advocate for businesses, particularly small businesses in the U.S. Congress. I asked to be on the 3 committees that I'm on. Obviously, in our district, transportation and infrastructure funding should be a bipartisan issue. The ag community and the effect on rural communities of ag policy is tremendous. So I wanted to be on that committee. But I will tell you, I had no idea that my most active committee in the Congress would end up being the House Committee on Small Business. But that's what happens when you find yourself in your first term in Congress in a global pandemic with all of the struggles and challenges. So I'll just say that it obviously has been a very stressful time for the nation's businesses as we've worked our way through this public health crisis that we're still in the middle of. But I believe completely that small businesses are really the heart and soul of the economy and of this country. And so I've made it a point and a focus during this pandemic to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to save as many small businesses as possible. At the beginning of this crisis, I actually wrote a bill that would push forgivable loans down to those SBA 7A lenders. Ultimately, of course, that was included in one of our bipartisan bills, the Paycheck Protection Program, which I know for many of you had some stops and starts at the beginning. I think there were 19 different guidance documents that came out at the beginning of this program. And although I know that this program was effective for many of you, I also know that it presented some challenges, particularly with that June 30th deadline that was initially put on the program. So I was glad to see that get extended to December 31st. My colleague, Dean Phillips, introduced that bipartisan legislation. And then, of course, a couple of weeks ago, I was honored to drop legislation that would extend to August 8th, the deadline for applying for a Paycheck Protection Program loan. Yesterday, I had a call with a number of credit unions throughout our congressional district, and it really was so heartwarming to hear individual stories of $9,000 loans, of $15,000 loans over the course of the last couple of weeks, where folks decided they really are going to take advantage of this program, and that extension to August 8th really made a significant difference. We have in the House passed additional legislation, the HEROES Act, that would provide another round of economic stimulus payments. It would extend unemployment insurance, although I suspect we're going to want to talk about at what levels here, because I'm well aware of some of the challenges with UI, as well as some of the benefits of the UI that we provided so far. And really, over the course of the next few weeks, the Senate, I believe, will be back and will be debating its own bill and or compromising with the House on its bill to come up with, and my understanding is the Senate adjourns on August 8th, so I suspect by that timeline we'll have better visibility into what is going to be in the next bill. One of the highest priorities that I've had is to make sure that I advocate for my cities and towns throughout the 2nd Congressional District, and I had 47 of my mayors and county commissioners sign on to a letter a few weeks ago that really relates to the additional support needed. We finally got the money. I've been advocating for the governor to get that money out to our cities. That money is coming out. I know they're doing some good things from an economic development perspective, many of the cities with those dollars, and I will continue to make sure that support for Minnesota and for the counties and cities and towns in Minnesota too are a high priority. Today we're going to be, as soon as I leave you, we're actually doing a hybrid committee markup in my Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We did the same thing a few weeks ago on a surface transportation bill, and today we're going to be doing one on a water resources bill. And so I'm going to be advocating strongly for some of the Army Corps of Engineer funding to dredge the Mississippi River. As many of you know, this congressional district is full of small towns up and down the Mississippi River and along the Minnesota River that has a huge economic impact on the state of Minnesota in this country with respect to the transportation aspect and all of the barges that support the ag economy and other economies inside this congressional district. So I've got a lot of work to do here today on the water resources Worder bill. So with that, I wanted just to say thank you for all of you. I know that this pandemic has not been equal in terms of its impact to each of your communities, each of your businesses. You know, I think that's one of the things that the Congress is going to have to consider moving forward for hospitality industry sectors, for restaurant industry sectors. I've actually co-sponsored a bill, the Restaurant Act, that would provide a grant program, not a loan, forgivable, just a flat out grant program to many of our restaurants and retail businesses that have been forced to close by state governments telling them to close. And so I'm just going to keep working in the Congress to see if we can appropriate as many dollars as possible to help you keep the economic engine of this country running while we get ourselves through this public health crisis. So with that, thank you. And of course, I'll just end my formal comments by saying if any of your businesses have a specific issue that you believe our office could be helpful with, please reach out to my district office. We've now coded, I think, 426 instances in our casework system of helping small businesses and folks during, as it relates to COVID-19. So again, thank you for having me this morning, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, yes, you segued very nice into that first question that I wanted to ask, because again, obviously we are seeing some grant programs now coming out and things, and probably one of the most common questions we were asked is, you know, are you aware of any additional programming, grant programs and things that will be available, especially to those that are hardest hit? And you mentioned a little bit restaurant, hospitality, fitness centers were another one that were closed for a long time, martial arts studios. So just people wanting to know, do you think there's more?
You know, what's interesting, Krista, is there is some pushback on picking and choosing industries. And so given that, you know, I certainly have supported the Restaurant Act, recognizing that. And I'm starting to see pieces of legislation being brought forward that, again, would address those hardest hit sectors of the economy. In order to facilitate, you know, this concern about picking and choosing industries, I actually introduced a bill. I call it P4 internally. It's the Prioritized Paycheck Protection Program, which would, as you all know, we have over $100 billion still remaining of appropriated money in the Paycheck Protection Program. And the P4 bill would allow those hardest hit sectors, without choosing among you, to come back and receive another forgivable loan. So while we still have money left appropriated, if your revenue has been impacted by 50% or greater, and you have 100 or fewer employees. And so that is a bill that I introduced a few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, in listening to just, you know, a number of sectors reach out and ask for my help. I do think that we will have to continue this conversation, particularly as you see the virus and community spread flare up around the country. You know, I think as you see states start to turn the dial backward, I'm hoping so much that Governor Walz does not have to do that, that Minnesotans are better at compliance with things like masks and just being generally careful. But, you know, there's no guarantee. And the virus is really going to determine what we need to do here. So I'm certainly open to advocating for those things. I've filed legislation that would allow a second forgivable loan for our hardest hit sectors. And I do think this conversation will have to continue, because there's no end date to good public policy here as long as this virus continues to spread.
Okay, great. And actually that brings up another question that came up too, is how much influence, you know, obviously that's a concern among businesses, is will the dial get turned back again? Will we be looking at closing? We see other states doing that right now. How much influence do you as Congress have on advocating for businesses to try and avoid some of that?
Well, look, I think the administration has made clear that they are delegating these responsibilities to the governors of each state. And to a certain degree, I agree with some of that. You know, certainly the virus, it isn't the same around the country. And so I think, you know, it's the same conversation if we have the conversation about schools. You know, I think it depends on what community spread looks like in each state and in each community. And so I think where I believe the federal government can still play a larger role is on the topic of supply chain. Who would have known, when I co-founded the Supply Chain Caucus in the U.S. Congress with another Democrat and 2 Republicans, you know, when I first did this, my team sort of rolled their eyes and said, "Oh, well, that's a, you know, a real interesting topic." You know, former head of HR for a manufacturing company, and what's funny now is all of a sudden supply chains are sexy. And so I've thought from the beginning of this pandemic that we should have had a stronger federal response from a supply chain perspective. Project Airlift was good. We get supplies as they come into the country faster. But what we're not doing is having a real method to distribute those supplies. So personal protective equipment. So we're seeing testing really reduced and also delayed in many of the states around the country where we're seeing these hotspots. I think the federal government should be figuring out where we need those supplies most. We shouldn't have states competing in it against one another, bidding against one another for these things. And so I think from a testing, a contact tracing, a supply chain perspective, we still can have a stronger federal response. The right approach, and I've been saying this since March, was to put that in place in March. The second most correct approach is to put that kind of supply chain czar approach in place today, because if we think about this, we got to make sure the, PPE is getting to where it needs to be the quickest. Our long-term care centers need it. When we think about what's happened in this pandemic, I personally see our food supply chain as a national security issue. Being on the Ag Committee, this is really important to me. I see this as a huge high priority. And I do believe that, we should be thinking about things like, if you want to keep the economy open, one of the best ways to do that is to just wear a mask. And so I know there's been lots of discussion about, and it really, it's very troubling to me that the idea of masks have become political, but I want to keep this economy open. And on all of that, Krista, I'll end with, we have to continue our focus on investing to find a vaccine. So, that's it. We got to remember, the minute we address the healthcare crisis we're in, we will start to address the economic crisis that we're in.
You're doing an excellent job of teeing up the next question I want to ask without even knowing. So thank you. That's what, because that was another common question is, do you think that there's enough federal funding being dedicated to finding a vaccine for this?
I think we've got the right approach as it relates to the efforts that we are undertaking to fund and work with private companies to fund the acceleration of vaccines. What I worry about, though, is an isolationist approach. Pulling out of the World Health Organization during a pandemic, doesn't seem like you're placing your bets really broadly enough. There's no guarantee that the U.S. will come up with the vaccine. There's no guarantee that a company who discovers this vaccine based outside the U.S. is going to prioritize the U.S. first. So I think we have got to take a broad view here and just say, yes, we are investing in a number of these areas, and continue to place our bets in a multitude of ways. And the other thing that I worry about right now, and that we're thinking through from a legislative perspective, is how do you equitably distribute the vaccine once it's discovered? Our capitalist system really lends itself in the U.S. to the folks getting the vaccine first will be the folks who can pay the most for it. And so I worry about how we distribute that. And then I think about what can we be doing to prepare now for equitable distribution of the vaccine, to make sure that all of a sudden we're not in some sort of supply chain constraint in distributing the vaccine once we actually get it. And then I'll stop with just saying that we're moving at warp speed as fast as we can, but we also have to think about the clinical efficacy and the safety protocol in a vaccine. And so just making sure that the Food and Drug Administration isn't moving so fast that they're cutting corners on the science here. I think as you look at the effectiveness of some of the rapid tests that have been developed to test for either serological or metabolic testing for the COVID-19 virus, a lot of those tests have proven to be not as effective as we would want in normal times. So these are the things that I'm thinking about, Krista, and there's no easy solution. So, this is all really hard stuff from a public policy perspective, but I do think we could be doing a much better job thinking through the supply chain of a vaccine now. And when it comes to personal protective equipment and other supply chain constraints on testing today, I do think that we still could be more effectively using the Defense Production Act.
Sure. Thank you for that. I do want to circle back a little bit, and you mentioned it earlier with the unemployment insurance and the $600. Obviously, as you know, and I know, we've had the conversation, and I know you have several that was a challenge for a lot of our businesses. And so again, wondering what the discussions are about that going forward, and is it going to be a one size fits all approach again, or are there other options being looked at if something like this were to be extended?
Krista, I think this is going to be a very large discussion during the negotiation. There is some view that, no one should make more than they did working, which, in a perfect world when we weren't moving as fast as we were, I would agree with. But the problem is, as you well know, none of these, you know that the platforms for unemployment insurance had to be completely redone at every state level across the country to accommodate things like the $600 plus up, to accommodate allowing sole proprietors to actually participate in unemployment insurance. And so when you start means testing these things, it truly slows things down. And so I think that one thing we could make more clear, I think, in future legislation is if you are called back to work and you don't have an underlying health condition that would prevent you with a doctor's note from coming back to work, you have to come back to work. And so that certainly was the legislative intent. And there are, some professions, particularly in hospitality and restaurants, where the $600 plus up did kick people above what they were making. And there are other professions for which the $600 plus up, as people are furloughed, didn't bring them back to where they were. But it's clearly on my mind that this is an issue, and I suspect that this will end up being a negotiated point in terms of the dollar amount if Congress decides to appropriate more UI benefit dollars. I will say that I get the business concern. When I talked to Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kaskari, one of the most important things that he says to me is the most important thing we can do as public policy makers, and I believe the Federal Reserve has also been fairly aggressive here, is continue to put dollars in the hands of the people who need it. What we're trying to stave off here is the domino effect of a banking crisis, a mortgage crisis, a rent crisis, and we're already starting to see signs of that out there in the broader economy. So you're right, it's an issue, and it's also a tough balancing act to be able to stave off the domino effect in the banking sector that would come if all of a sudden 30% of Americans can't make their mortgage or their rent.
Sure. And again, as you know, very, very passionate issue in our business community. Is that something that, again, as you encourage people to reach out to you, I am assuming to hear their stories and things like that, is that something that you're welcoming?
Absolutely.
Feedback from them as you're making those decisions. And I don't know, are there things that they could answer that would help you as you're having those conversations?
Yeah, I think particularly reach out to me in my office. I'd love to have a conversation with businesses so I can better understand which sectors are facing this challenge the most. Every single piece of legislation that I've introduced has been generated from a conversation with one of my local businesses, every single piece. So please reach out, let me hear your stories, and that will make me much more informed as we go into these negotiations. I'll just caution all of you though, what's interesting is this point, if we get a bill, a compromise bill that actually gets passed from the Congress, what my observation is in the prior three bills is it ends up being negotiated essentially between Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, right, from the administration's perspective, because nothing's going to get, the House may pass a law, the Senate may pass a bill, but unless we're actually sitting down talking together, there's no chance those bills become law. So I suspect, and I'm already seeing signs that the White House is indicating to leadership in the House that they're ready to sit back down and talk about what next needs to be in the next bill. And my observation from the other bills, and I'll just be candid about it, is the White House and the Senate are not always on the same page. And what ends up happening is the Senate ultimately does what the president wants the Senate to do. So it's been an interesting process to watch. It's really the House negotiating with the White House on most of these bills.
Okay. All right. Good information to know. Circling back again a little bit on the PPP and the business funding, you've mentioned you talked to some credit unions. We've heard from some banks that there's some discussion that there may be some automatic forgiveness of loans under 150,000. Do you know anything about where we're at that? Is there a good chance of that, or where is that in the process?
Yeah, I know this is an urgent question for many business owners who are starting to be asked to put together that information for the forgivable loan portion. A bill has been introduced in the Senate that would set the automatic forgiveness at $150,000 loans or less. Again, I think this will be a negotiated point. I'm doubtful that it will be that high, but for a lot of our small community lenders and credit unions, it sounds like anything north of 30,000 would actually equip many of those small businesses to be forgiven without having to produce a bunch of administrative burden and paperwork. So it's an active conversation. What I would say to folks is I wouldn't just because the Congress is talking about something, I wouldn't count on it happening. And so unfortunately, my advice is you're probably better off starting to collect the documentation that's going to be needed for that forgivable portion of your loan. I certainly will be supportive of some level, whether it's 150,000 or a little bit lower than that, of automatic forgiveness. That these loans are exactly what this program was designed to achieve, to help the smallest of small businesses. And I also understand that our businesses are still under stress and anxiety. Just because we've turned the dial doesn't mean that many of our sectors have the customer levels that you had previously, and certainly to a certain extent, not even possible because of the capacity constraints the state of Minnesota and other states have put on the number of customers that can be inside your facility at any given point in time.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, we're getting close on time, so I'm thinking kind of to wrap it up a little bit, maybe one last question of it, and this may be too big for the time we have left, but do you have kind of a dream solution to this? I mean, is there, I don't want to say a silver bullet, but something that would kind of work well with this?
Krista, I continue to believe that our highest priority has got to be to address the healthcare side of this. As you said, the investment in putting as many chips on the table as possible for a possible vaccine, continuing to invest in companies that are looking for therapies, and then our backup position. Really, there's already a model for this, and honestly, this is probably what drives me the most crazy is that if you effectively activate the Defense Production Act, right? I know there are businesses that are willing to manufacture many of the things that we need right now that we haven't put into service. We've done it a couple of times with 3M respirators. And, the DPA has been ill-positioned. I mean, it's there. It's at the executive's disposal, the president's disposal. 3M is being paid royalties, being paid by the other manufacturers in order to manufacture their products. So I think we could be doing a better job. I know PPE, there have been some constraints continue to emerge. We have seen some of the hospitals start to or continue to reuse much of the equipment that was intended for single use. The backup position too is what other countries are doing. We have the model, and that's what's so frustrating is testing, and the test can't come back 8 days later, 10 days later. It's useless if it comes back 10 days later. And contact tracing. Germany, for example, has done a fabulous job of testing and contact tracing, and have stood up at the federal level, their federal level, 400 centers around the country just for contact tracing. But you can't do this effectively either with a testing system that comes back 8 to 10 days later. So invest, put the right strategy in place at the healthcare level, and eventually the economy will take care of itself.
Representative Craig, thank you so much for taking the time with us this morning. I know we had a lot of questions we did not get to, which we knew would probably be the case. But again, Representative Craig made it clear, if there are questions that you have that we did not answer, please reach out to either her staff or reach out to the chamber president in your respective area, and we will certainly make that connection to her and her staff. Again, thank you so much for taking this time. We know how busy you are. And again, a special thank you to our series sponsor, law firm of Doherty, Melinda, Solfest, Hills, and Bauer, for helping to make this possible. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day. Representative Craig, again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.